Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk5431. Cryptopunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we've got Punk5431. She's a 3 Atty with purple eyeshadow, purple lipstick, and blonde straight hair. She's a Stanford grad and an absolute gigabrain and the ex-engineering lead at Palantir. She's now founder of Probably Something, a team of builders of next-gen software for NFT creators and collectors. Most recently building LifeBoat, an NFT actions and announcement notice board that I use daily. Please welcome Nat.eth to the show. Nat, hello and welcome.
Thanks for having me. Great to be on.
Yeah, nice to sort of speak to you. I think the last time, I'm not sure if you remember, but we did actually speak briefly at NFT NYC when you hosted the Lifeboat event.
Very briefly,
and,
yeah.
Sort of
a whirlwind of a week.
Absolutely.
I think it took me about a week after to recover from the craziness of that week.
Absolutely. Did you get COVID or?
I didn't get COVID. I basically just got no sleep for about 4 days, just running from the Cool Cats pop-up to Ape Fest, which was obviously ongoing for the whole time, to, of course, our Probably Something event. It's great. I mean, I can't wait to do it again next year.
I think it's a little bit earlier this time, so hopefully we can reconnect then. But maybe we can just start really simply, Nat. I guess just a brief introduction to yourself, your background, and sort of how you found yourself into Web3.
Yeah, sure. Well, to kick things off, I mean, I've really always been interested in this broad set of questions around where's technology going and how is it getting ahead of where we are now? And so initially that brought me to the policy realm at Georgetown, where I was really interested in questions around how do we regulate this stuff, and found myself through my engineering experience at Palantir for 5 years, which, for those who don't know, Palantir is a company that does data integration work for governments and commercial institutions around the world, and ended up running a lot of the government strategy there and engineering teams around the privacy features of the product. So working a ton with law enforcement, a bunch with the US Department of Defense, and abroad with broadly government agencies. And that really hit on this question of what's being built today and how are we responding to, the challenges of institutions today. And broadly, that's the same set of interests broadly that brought me to Web3. I realized at a certain point that many of the problems that we were seeing with institutions writ large were being handled completely differently in the Web3 space. And similarly to actually what you see with government technology, in crypto, I saw the promise of something brand new where we could actually define rules from the ground up. And so I got really excited about this prospect of, could we actually shape what digital ownership looks like from first principles, as opposed to a lot of what I was doing at Palantir, which was taking institutions that were incredibly complex, incredibly established, and working to basically reestablish or uphold a lot of the values that they held. Whereas in Web3, we're building values from the ground up. So that was really exciting to me. And when I left Palantir to go to Stanford, it all kind of clicked for me when I bought my first NFT and went way down into the depths of everything that Web3 has to offer, and distributed computing more broadly, honestly.
So your experience at Palantir was before Stanford?
So I actually did my undergraduate degree at Georgetown, and then coming out of Georgetown, which is out in DC, ended up at Palantir for 5 years, and then came back to do my graduate degree at Stanford Business School. So I came back around, and one of the things I realized while at Palantir was that a lot of my experience was focused on the engineering side and on the policy side. And there was this whole third sphere of decisions, which were how are companies actually trading off policy and and the actual business realities. And a lot of business is obviously about incentive structures and thinking about incentives at scale. And capitalism is probably one of the best sets of incentives that has ever been developed, if not the best. And as we think about Web3, I mean, a lot of what tokenization does is it gives you a whole new way to think about incentive structures. And so it sits at the union of those three things that are my background: the policy side, the tech side, and of course the business side. So that was one of my motives for going back, even though while at business school I've essentially just spent most of my time coding, I'd say. And I'm actually just to clarify, I'm finishing in about a few months, basically. So I'm coming to the tail end here and spending about 90% of my time working on the product and about 10% knocking out what class I can in the meantime.
Could you just maybe elaborate a little bit, because I'm just curious about Palantir as well. Some of the problems that you were sort of tackling around, you mentioned policy and data, and I think you mentioned, I guess, the concept of values, trying to work with what they have versus, Web3 starting from sort of first principles. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Palantir, for those who aren't super familiar with it, a lot of what they do is deploy systems that integrate a lot of data from organizations. So if, for example, you are a law enforcement agency, you are often drowning in case records, in vehicle records, and all these different registries and data sources that are available to you, but that are not searchable or really interpretable from an end user perspective. And one of the core value propositions of Palantir is bringing that together. But when you do so, you effectively create a new privacy risk, because now things that were basically separate, by chance, effectively, and by structure, are now in one place. And so a lot of the challenges that I focused on there was, once you create this new attendant privacy risk, how do you think about governing that and overseeing that with things like access controls, data retention, when do we delete data, and user oversight? So how do we think about who's accessing what when? And that's obviously building on top of an institution that's already existing and functioning and doing its job. And that's true for everything that I worked on. In Web3, what's interesting is you have people who are often, very, I wouldn't say antithetical, but coming at it from a completely different perspective than someone who's built something before. It's folks that are incredibly idealistic in the ways that they can think about organizational structures. And so rather than trying to stitch together all these design decisions and historical cultural decisions that are implicit in the way any government agency is structured, you're effectively starting with this almost neo-libertarian culture, and starting with first principles and privacy standards that are in fact completely the opposite of the government, where you have data sectioned into one place. You now have data that is effectively open and widespread and accessible. And so on one hand, that is incredibly liberating for devs and anyone who's interested in leveraging data. On the other hand, it also constitutes a new privacy risk, and also changes user expectations of how that data is going to be used. Because the distinction of the blockchain is, of course, that in the conventional Web 2 bank model, your transactions are private for all intents and purposes, are shared amongst a consortium of organizations. In this scenario, your identity is private, but your transactions are public. And that privacy paradigm shift fundamentally changes everything about the way that we think about Web3. So there's power structures there. There's data access and transparency. And I'm sorry, I'm going a little philosophical here, but it's a fundamental paradigm shift in how we think about data and think about privacy and think about what's possible. And so that's really the thing that got me so excited about crypto writ large.
No, it's
and I'll stop there.
No, I could sort of nerd out on this for a while because I think it's an interesting point for me too. Just to sort of see how concepts of privacy and identity started to evolve, especially I guess all the regulatory sort of talk right now, touching sort of DeFi protocols. How do we sort of navigate through that, and how do we regulate that? Um, but more, I guess maybe it's a nice sort of segue into having a bit of a chat about what are you working on now, and what are you sort of translating, I guess, your insights and knowledge into?
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and hitting on this point about public ownership information effectively, is that it changes the things that are possible to do with ownership and information management writ large. So I'll give you an example. If I wanted to today say, Maxwell, I know, all of the vehicles you own and homes and memberships and all of these different aspects of your identity, just by virtue of integrating APIs, that would be an incredibly difficult technical challenge to solve. And it would require, things like Plaid for bank integration. It would require connecting to bespoke ownership systems, either property records or vehicle records. And most of those things would not be accessible. And so right now, I actually couldn't solve your problem of understanding at any given time a true, solution to what you own in your portfolio and what you should do with it broadly. One of the interesting things about blockchain is that is entirely reversed. So I could actually not know who you are, but I could tell you at a given moment that you need to pay your property taxes, or that actually there's a recall on your vehicle. And when you bring that into the crypto space, it becomes this tractable problem that has never been possible to solve before. Which is to say, I can give you a to-do list for your life and for your digital assets in one place. And the bet we're making is that that's solvable, and that it's in fact one of the seminal problems of this next phase of the web, is understanding what you have, what memberships you hold, and what you can do with them. So that's what we're solving with LifeBoat. And LifeBoat is right now basically taking all of the NFTs that you own across all of your wallets, and then it's updating you on the various utility that's associated with them. So even more granularly, it's taking the Discord announcements out of Discord, and it's putting them in a structured data format, so you can basically mark things off just like a to-do list, like you would with any other management solution.
Yeah. No, it's super useful because I can't keep up with 50 discords. So I mean, I've just picked up stuff from there that I didn't even know I was eligible for. So it's been super useful. Um, just I'm not sure if you've done it yet, but is there an opportunity for third party applications to add utility to I guess an NFT on that platform at some stage?
Yeah, well, so one thing on the other side of this that we're working on is can you actually think about also then giving creators a better way to reach their own community members. So right now we have a team of people who at all hours of the day are reviewing all of the content coming out of right now around 260 NFT projects, and we're adding more daily. And they're taking all that content, they're distilling it into understandable, simple bits and tasks that are then going to our users. But longer term, we also want to unlock the creator side of things. So thinking a lot more about, if I, as a project leader, want to communicate with my community, there aren't many great solutions to do that right now. You have Twitter, which is incredibly unstructured and easy to miss because it's wrapped behind an algorithm that is incredibly opaque. You have Discord, which becomes, as you noted, completely overwhelming. I have, let's see, I'll actually pull it up right now. I have 4,512 Discord announcements that I have not read right now, in part because I'm only using Lifeboat at this point. And it just becomes completely unsustainable. And so you need this structured data format. And as a creator, I want to understand who's actually seen my announcement and who might actually want to reach out to. So in association with our partners, Chimpers, Pixel Vault, Ghosts, Alpha Dog, Floor, and we're actually about to bring on a whole new set of partners, we're refining this workflow as well. And so in that process, we're also attempting to make the space safer, more friendly by having signed announcements and signed information going to holders as well. So yeah, I mean, it's something we're totally focused on, and right now we're building for two completely different user groups, but hoping that we can bridge them together in the long term and make this more of a standard in the space.
Absolutely, it's a super useful tool, and I think something that was interesting for me just to sort of observe was, I think when we came from the Web 2 sort of space, it felt like it was more push marketing. It was always in your face. It was like Instagram, Facebook. You were hit up with ads, people texting you, emailing you, sort of saying, "Hey, look at me, action something." I sort of feel like with Web3, yes, people can drop stuff in your wallet, but you might not know that it's there. But I think your product feels like it's more of a true Web3 product where basically you get to select what you want to see,
Mm-hmm.
I guess on your terms. And I think that's really changing, I guess, the dynamic of really owning your assets, owning your data, and being a little bit more empowered with that too, which is what I really love about Lifeboat.
Yeah, agreed. And it's something too with my experience in the privacy space that we think a lot about is what types of interactions do you want to have, and there's a reasonable use case that we pushed off for a long time and continue to push off until we can think about it and get it right, which is if I as a new project want to reach holders of XYZ collections, what is the right way to do that? And I think in Web3, one of the great things is you actually have, exactly as you know, this incredible opportunity to take a completely different perspective on it, where users are actually pulling information that they want instead of being pushed information that's effectively structured by some hyper targeted algorithmic solution.
Mm.
And again, that's the beauty of having ownership without identity, is that you can actually enable things like that without having to know every last detail of someone's life in order to basically hyper target ads to them.
And so, Nat, what do you think about, I guess, this concept of soulbound tokens that's starting to emerge in the space? Like, where do you sort of see that, and how does that sort of play into, I guess, what you're trying to build?
Well, I think some form of soulbound tokens is inevitable and is pretty much core to the way that we want to take the product longer term. And one of the reasons, when we talk about digital ownership and community membership, a lot of that looks like soulbound tokens. So, I talked a little bit about this idea of identity being hidden and transactions being public. A lot of this is, and a lot of privacy in general, is about control and the ability to control whether or not you opt in. So soulbound tokens are an example where, by and large, I mean, if I have my Stanford degree on chain, you're likely to be able to re-identify me based on that information. And so a lot is about having that option to opt in. And so I don't see them as actually conflicting, this question of anonymity and soulbound tokens. I do think soulbound tokens have a ways to go to be practical broadly, in particular around hacks and safety in the space. We just need better solutions, and I think we need a higher layer of abstraction to make anything like SBTs possible. That said, if you can reliably capture that membership identity as a soulbound token, that's incredibly powerful for what it can enable in terms of actually better understanding your digital self and better engaging in these digital communities.
Mm. And like in my mind, when I was sort of thinking through this as well, is I think there's this emerging sort of trend of decentralized ID, and basically you can still be anonymous, but you build up a track record of trust over time, depending on what protocols and how you engage on chain. But I sort of still feel like there is an element or a space for centralized identity as well. So, something that I've been thinking through, I think, because I used to work for a corporate services provider, right? So we used to set up offshore companies, BVI in Cayman, 150,000 entities. You can imagine how much data that we would have to tackle every day, right? So, passport copies, proof of addresses for directors, shareholders, ultimate beneficial owners, etc. If we could sort of take that off chain and have a centralized ID issue that for a director, but then enable the user to basically permission that or open that data up to third parties, it could be quite interesting, right? So if you're a, if you were a sophisticated investor and your accountant gave you a soulbound token, sort of said that you were, you have a net worth more than $1 million, that you were a sophisticated investor by the legal sort of terms, then technically, some of the funds could actually just open up access to some of the funds for you to invest in without actually onboarding you in some ways, right? If they could sort of do that. I don't know how
Yeah,
far away from that, but
I do think we're getting there. This entire, everything that's happening right now with homomorphic encryption, zero knowledge proofs, as it applies to data processing on chain, is wildly exciting. And so I do think there's opportunity for oracles that plug into existing KYC solutions and plug into existing sources of identity. I also think there's an opportunity for more on-chain information storage that's secured through some of these cryptographic methods. The right answer is probably that it's going to be somewhere in between, of course, right? You'll have some on-chain track record, but my sense is that when we look towards broader adoption, especially of identity in particular, it's going to have to come in accordance, and as you know, right, with participation from a lot of these centralized providers. So short answer, I think you're super right. I don't know if it's going to be all encompassing, but some combination of that will without question have a huge role to play.
Absolutely. And then just with your product as well, I think at the moment it takes a bit of a static view in a sense of here are all the NFTs that you own, here are all the opportunities or utility that's available at a point in time. Have you will you sort of consider going back and looking through wallets and reading any historical on-chain data and records to, I guess, make an inference about the user for other purposes at all?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely could, and it's not out of the question that of course you have this whole corpus of data, particularly when thinking about ways that a user may or may not care about something. I think that's one source of data we can use. On the other hand, I think the question of and back to something we discussed, this question of user opt-in and user pull. One of our thoughts is that the user should, expressly or intently actually want to bring in that data and request to bring in that data as a source of information about what they're interested in seeing. So, for example, if I sold my Punk, but I still wanted to be updated on Punk's, Punk's goings on as a Punk alum, that might be something I'd opt into. So we're thinking really critically about user control and the ways that we leverage data. But yeah, I mean, transaction data is obviously huge in terms of things you can do with it. So yeah, any ideas?
None at the moment. I'm just super curious because, like, I think in my mind, this whole space is really around trust, right? And in my mind, the only way you build up trust is consistency over time. And if you've got a brand new wallet with not a lot of transactions or records on it, you'd be a little bit cautious. But if you've seen that, I guess the wallet has interacted and voted on governance protocols and added liquidity, and there's inferences that you can make just from the collection that they hold and what values that they sort of identify with. And look, some of it's subjective, but I think there could be something interesting there, as opposed to just a static sort of view.
Yeah. Well, one thing we're really thinking about right now is this question of royalties too. So a lot of collections are really grappling with this rise of either zero royalty or optional royalty marketplaces. So Blur is interesting in this regard. Looks Rare, what they're doing is super interesting. Obviously, X2Y2 is more in the zero category. And so what we're thinking about there is, from a collection side, could you actually have perks for holders that more consistently pay royalties, insofar as they're more of these active traders? And so things like that, where we can provide direct value to our collector base, are really interesting to us. And one of the things that I love about crypto is that because we have launched NFT collectibles, we're able to, ensure that we're aligned with our users at the end of the day. And so that's an incentive for us where we know that anything we build needs to serve and treat those holders as at the center of what we do. So yeah, we're just thinking pretty critically about it, and being pretty thoughtful in the way that we roll things out.
Amazing. Well, looking forward to seeing what comes next for probably something in LifeBoat. And maybe just one last question. Where do you see, I guess, the big names from Web2 playing a role in this whole data sort of space? So, Facebook Meta and Instagram and I guess Twitter. Like, where do you sort of see this all sort of moving to as well?
Well, for those in particular, I have a little bit of a different answer than the way that I think about consumer brands. I think consumer brands are going to be wildly essential to the space. When it comes to the big tech companies, they are very interested in adapting. I mean, writ large. I mean, I think Google is doing a lot. Gabriel Ayuso, quick shout out to him, is super active at Google and doing a lot of Web3 stuff there. That's really exciting. The Facebooks of the world are a little more nuanced. I think Google especially, but also Amazon, in terms of their cloud services offerings, are going to be pretty core to the backbone of this stuff, just based on what I've seen in the space as a dev. The metas of the world, I think the question is not one of spend or of willingness on their part. It's a question of public receptivity and whether or not folks like us, or folks more directly not like us, would accept meta overlords, if you will, of the metaverse, so to speak. And I don't know if we've actually seen that play out yet. So I'll be
Like,
curious to see.
Where do you sit on that swing?
I believe in an open metaverse. So I want to see more interoperability. And for us, I mean, I say that as someone who's launched a product that is, not fully on chain, but with the intention of, and I think we always have to have an eye towards leveraging more of these decentralized primitives as we build and as we scale, because that is the power of this. It's the interoperability piece. And the challenges for those companies is their entire business model is based on taxes on commerce in digital spaces. And the way to preserve those taxes is largely with a closed ecosystem. So it's hard for me to believe that they'll be able to get around that. And as a result, I tend to prefer myself the much more open model, even though, the next wave of tech companies may not be as profitable as the Metas and standard Google ad revenue models were of the last phase. And we'll see how it shakes out.
I'd love a tax-free world in some ways, but
Yeah, we all
awesome.
would. And I mean, and it's this tension too. Yeah.
Well, and then so maybe let's go back a little bit. I know we sort of nerded out then, but it's a fantastic product. I'll definitely put it in the show notes for everybody to have a look at. What was your journey into crypto like? Like, how did you discover? What was that path like for Bitcoin, Ethereum? Everyone's got a bit of a different journey into this space. What was your journey?
It was a bit meandering. I'd say, I bought 4 ETH in 2016 or so. I think it was 2016 at about $90 a coin, and then got really into Ripple, and then just watched it all tumble. And like many before me, I quickly sold and said, "Gosh, I'll never touch that speculative asset again." And it wasn't really until NFTs that I was drawn back in, and AVAX especially. AVAX was interesting to me because as a technical individual, I was just really drawn in by the separation of concerns. I thought the consensus model was really interesting, and also just found staking and delegating really interesting. in a way that to me felt more compelling, or at least more accessible for whatever reason. Maybe it was just the receptivity of myself at the time, than spinning up a mining rig. Because obviously by 2018, 2019, to mine ETH or to mine Bitcoin, there was a pretty significant barrier to entry. So I got started delegating AVAX, and that was interesting. But then what really piqued my interest, sad as I am to say, is an airdrop. I was airdropped, I think, 5,000 or something baguette tokens, bag, which was a DEX on AVAX, and the only way to redeem it was to get a MetaMask wallet.
Nice.
So I downloaded MetaMask and claimed it, and then realized that my baguette coins, or as I like to call them, bread money, was worth like 5,000 USD. So that was just a moment where I said, wow, this is just absurd. And this happened to coincide with the big, what I'll call NFT summer bull run. So I basically ran out of things to do on AVAX because I got immediately hooked. And then just kept going and kept going and kept going. And then all of a sudden I found myself with 400 NFTs or so, and a lot of blue chips, and a Twitter, and and now a company in the space too, because I just became so convinced and so compelled by the reality of what was happening in the space, and it just got really exciting.
Do you remember, I guess, your first NFT that you bought, and I guess timing of when you bought that?
I do. It was a crypto seal. It was one of the first. It was one of the first ERC 721s on AVAX, and which is interesting because I feel like most people start on ETH, but yeah, I just bought it, and I just found it incredibly fun at the moment. I mean, at the time, AVAX was worth basically nothing, so they were pretty cheap. They were still using a bonding curve. I just assumed that was how it was done. Bought probably 4 or 5 of them towards the end of the curve, and still own them. Wouldn't really sell them at this point, honestly. But when I got into ETH NFTs, I mean, that was when things really took off. And it was it was oh,
So what's
sorry,
the
go ahead.
timing? Yeah, sorry. What was the
Oh
timing
yeah,
around it?
no, the timing. It must have been, I'd say, like early 2020. Or maybe early 2021, actually. Yeah, sorry, early 2021, I think.
Yep.
Was the time that I finally dipped my toes into NFTs. Um, yeah, and it had to have been that, because that's about when my taxes became incredibly complicated. Um, yeah.
Where do you trade AVAX NFTs? Because you can't trade them in OpenSea, right? It's like another marketplace ecosystem.
Yeah, a lot of, I mean, actually, OpenSea did just, I believe, start supporting a number of networks, and I believe AVAX was amongst them. They definitely started supporting Arbitrum recently, which is pretty exciting. But yeah, I mean, that's super recent that they've really expanded to different marketplaces on different EVM compatible chains. The the places I've traded at AVAX NFTs honestly have been pretty much bespoke marketplaces. So a lot of these projects spun up simple marketplace contracts, and that's pretty much it. But realistically, most of my trading activity, I mean, the vast majority has been on ETH and OpenSea, Looks Rare, just the standard ecosystems that I'd say the bulk of the market is still on.
Basically, early 21 was your first venture into NFTs. And then you made the transition to ETH NFTs where the action was. How did you find your way into Cryptopunks? Like, what was that journey?
Well, it's always been the goal for me, that I call it the NFT trinity of a punk, an ape, and an OG ghost, which is a more one-of-one collectible hand-drawn collection. And I got the ghost very early on, and it's always been basically my favorite NFT collection. The ape I also got pretty early, after I watched it go from about 1.5 ETH to 7 ETH was, I think, the floor when I ended up buying my ape. And then the punk just eluded me because I missed the claim period, of course, and just watched those run as everything else did. So it wasn't until you know earlier this year that I ended up finally getting my punk via this massive trade with Bozy, who's been in the space and is a really great collector, really nice guy. And it took about 3 to 4 months of negotiating to finally broker this deal, because I was set on getting a punk with long blonde hair, and um, and it took a long time. I mean, there just aren't that many of them. But I will say it's a hugely undervalued trait on punks.
Absolutely. So, so I'm just going back. So basically, what are there? 144 punks that have straight, they say straight hair, blonde, but yeah, long blonde hair, and it
Mm-hmm.
does sort of look like you. So I can sort of see why you would wait out for one. Um, what was your, I guess, what was your purchasing sort of process like? Did you find this one and then negotiate? I don't know who was he again? Is he
So Bozy,
Bozy?
I
Okay,
think he changed his name to Meta Diablo at some point.
okay,
But yeah, so I mean,
Bozy.
Meta, he I mean, it's tricky buying punks because it's obviously a very ETH denominated market, and the standard CryptoPunks marketplace is it's very difficult to get in touch with someone, and this is a challenge in Web3 writ large. Is that if you have a wallet address, contacting that individual is really tough. So when I was eyeing the punk when it went on the market, and then I saw it was snatched up by someone that I knew, which was this guy Bozy. And as soon as he bought it, I immediately launched into negotiations, because I thought, here's someone that I could broker some compound trade with multiple assets and value. And it took much longer than I would have expected. And I think he probably got the better of it. But when you're buying a punk for the next 30 years, you don't worry too much about the entry. You just want to get the right one.
What was, I guess, the compelling reason for you to buy a punk? I think you sort of said they were sort of three grails in your mind. It was the ghost, the ape, and the punk,
Mm-hmm.
the holy trinity. But what was it about, I guess, the punk sort of collection that piqued your interest? Do you think?
There's an element of punks that you kind of have to love to hate them. To be fair, I mean, the punks, their reputation in the NFT community, especially during the bull, was elitist, and they just know that they're the OGs, and nothing else matters. And there was this punks apes dynamic where it felt like they were at war, and everyone was looking at apes flipping punks, and so much animosity. The thing about punks, though, is that they really are, and you could look at Mooncats, you could look at all these other OG collections, and when you look at the whole market, there's nothing that has the cultural staying power, at least as I see it, in terms of historical NFTs, as punks. And I think there's a lot of elements of that. One is obviously time, and just standard historical on-chain aspects. But I think it's also just the fact that punks, through the media and through culture, became synonymous with NFTs in the early days. And because of that, because they hold that cultural weight, I I would be very, very surprised to see punks not last long term. So I mean, of all the things in my portfolio, I feel like my punk is probably the thing I'm most confident about, because there's very little execution risk of a team in upholding its value. It's an on-chain collectible in almost its purest form.
I think you've changed your Twitter sort of profile to a punk as well. What do you normally use as your identity? Is it your punk? Because I think I've seen you use the rotate it through with ghosts a couple times as well. Um, is there one that you sort of most identify with as a profile picture or identity in Web3?
I think at this point, my long-term profile pick will always be my punk. But I will say that the ghost collection I will likely always cycle through. And I think if you look at NFT Twitter right now, there are a lot of pretty fantastic collectors sporting ghosts. PFPs, like Dingaling is a great example. Path is another who's typically sported a ghost. Um, but for me, the punk, I mean, I've never sported my ape as my profile picture, so most people probably don't even realize they have one, just because I've never vibed with it in a
Mm.
way that I want it to represent me, not because I don't love my ape. It's a great clean ape, but yeah, no, I mean, for me, it's probably the punk long term.
I just wanted to dig in a little bit in terms of your collection and what you collect, but I think you've spoken about ghosts. To be honest with you, I don't know much about ghosts. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about the collection and what makes it so special to you?
Yeah, it's one of those collections where the people in the community are so devoted and committed to it that it basically stands on that almost alone. It was basically the first project that was a hand drawn NFT. So the artist draws each one individually and slowly releases them, and had collectible elements where you could combine different pieces to create new pieces. So you have now, I mean, you have significant holder concentration, but also dogged faith in the collection for those who have held. And the people who like ghosts are the ones who honestly just really vibe with the art. It's one of those collections that people hold on to and are incredibly diamond handed on. I mean, at this point, I've held most of my ghosts, and I probably have about eight one of ones, 8 to 10 one of ones from them. And it's just one of those things where I'm getting stuff framed. It's just pieces that I see as long term holds. Now, I think the question of will it hold up from a collectability standpoint is still in question, but I will say the artist Gong Yang, who's pseudonymous, and NFT Fiend, who runs a lot of the business side of the project, they're still grinding out here in this market and just continually doing more. So they've launched a collection called Monsters now, which is a similar vibe, but slightly darker in the art itself. So that's been really
Mm,
interesting to watch too.
nice. Yeah, they're really cool. And I mean, so basically, there's 390 pieces in this collection, and they're all hand drawn. Um, and do you know much about the artist, where he sort of came from, and if was this his first sort of foray into NFTs, and did he have like a background before NFTs?
Well, the rumor, at least as I've heard it, is that he used to be in the animation industry
I see.
and supposedly worked at Netflix, or at least at some streaming service, and quit his job to go all in on NFTs. And they told him he was crazy at the time. This was before the bull market, and then listed his first NFT, the first ghost, for I think it was 0.001 ETH, and then woke up the next day and the first few were sold out, and then just kept going, and then the floor got away from him, and the whole thing just completely took off. So that's
Amazing.
that's the story. He's now launching this, the Ghost comic, which are also NFTs, but the
Yeah.
goal is to build a much broader world of the Ghost universe.
Awesome. Yeah, I picked up a couple from, I guess, I think I was whitelisted from probably something
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of these mints. So I still got those as well. So I'll keep an eye out for him as well. Cool. And then right now, I guess in this sort of market, are you eyeing off any particular collections or looking to add to anything at the moment?
So, I mean, I'm actually pretty happy with my exposure. I haven't been doing a lot of selling or buying, frankly. In part, I also, we're really focused on building out this platform, and so we'll also be spinning up an insider trading policy for our team soon. And so that's something we've thought about, and something that I'm conscious of too. I wouldn't want any of my trading to reflect on our partners. Um, that said, I'm happy to tell you what I'm bullish on and what I have strong exposure to. You can actually just take a look at my pinned pieces in my vault on OpenSea.
Mhm.
But things I'm really excited for and continue to be excited for, Clone X. I think you can't overlook the value of Artifact and just really being under the Nike umbrella. I'm excited for Proof. I think they're doing a lot, and so I'm going to be curious to see how that plays out. But I continue to hold my Moonbirds and my Proof Pass. I'm super excited and continue to be really bullish on Pixel Vaults, which has long been a huge force in the space, and I think there's been a fair amount of FUD on Pixel Vaults. But I just think G Funk and Deconomist and Potamus and the rest of the team is really really sharp, and I think they're doing a lot of interesting things. I mean, the list could go on for so long. I think Chimpers is great. Continue to love Ghosts. On some of these newer projects, I'm excited for many of them. I'm curious to see how they shake out. I think we're going to see probably 1 to 3 collections in the bear market end up having staying power, but it's obviously a really tough time to launch a collection. So
Absolutely.
curious to see what happens there. I want to see more real world utility writ large, and that's something that we're working towards with Lifeboat and the whole ecosystem of products we're planning to build. So
Absolutely. Bridging the two worlds together is, I think, everybody's modus operandi in this market. And if you look back on your, I guess, your NFT career to date, do you sort of have any, notable wins or losses worth speaking about?
I mean, the wins are the friends we make along the way at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's definitely, I mean, trading wise, I've been incredibly fortunate, and I think getting into NFTs is right place, right time. Some smarts, and some additional probably luck on top of that. Um, in terms of wins, I've had quite a few. I'd say I think early 2022 I had a lot of wins. More recently, I bought doodles, a lot of doodles prior to the big run up. I actually minted five. That was a big win for me. I also bought. I really just love the doodles, and I bought a shark doodle on secondary for about 6 ETH, and then recently sold that for, I don't remember, must have been, was it 55?
Wow.
So there's a lot of wins like that. I mean, World of Women, I also minted a bunch of those. I thought I was crazy because I remember I think I got number 282, so I was one of the first minters on World of Women, and it looked like they weren't going to sell out. And I pinged the team and said, hey, like, one day of minting later, have you guys considered how you're going to sell this out? That was the worst holder ever in doing that. And then, of course, Gary Vee tweets, and then they sell out instantly. So yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate in the space, and I think at this point, I'm really focused on seeing these as my long term holds and my long term collectibles, and obviously having exposure to the wonderful ecosystems being built, and then on the other side, thinking about, okay, where is digital ownership headed? And that's why so much of my focus right now is on the probably something side.
And if you were to look across, I guess, the Twitter space, is there like a favorite punk personality that comes to mind?
So many. Oh, I mean, the obvious one, which I'm sure is beaten to death on this channel, is 6529. Is their threads, his threads are exceptional. The long view, and we aim to hold the longest view in the room at probably something, but I will say 6529 is close to holding a longer view. I think what he's done for the space with Open Metaverse, with 6529 Capital, and investing in the space, and supporting decentralized solutions. There's a lot there. Another one who deserves a shout out is Quit, OX Quit, who's also just does a lot of security write ups, does a lot of good for the space. Worked with him a fair amount and just ran him through our entire code base in just chatting through Lifeboat, and he's a really really great guy, and huge shout out to him as well. But so I mean, there's so many I could
Awesome.
go on.
No, that's cool. And if you were to describe punk culture in a few words, how would you describe it?
I think I'd go with anti-establishment establishment because punks are, they still represent this crazy group of people that made oftentimes huge financial bets on this future, which is in some ways anti-establishment, but they're also the establishment of crypto. So there's this interesting tension where they still represent this brand new wave, but also are the 1% of the 1% of that wave. And I say that, of course, as a holder and having enjoyed many a punk brunch and many a punk event, and so I like to think we have a little bit of both now, the anti-establishment, but also punks are a lot of the people building the future here. So we'll be
Absolutely.
curious to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I really like that, the anti-establishment establishment. Very counterculture too, I think. Um, and if you could pass on a message to the next owner of your punk, what would you like to say to them?
What next owner? Who is this future next owner? I mean, I suppose my children one day. I'd say never sell.
Never sell.
Diamond hand
Perfect.
for life.
Perfect. So, Natalie, this was super fun. Just to sort of unwrap your story and how you sort of got here. It's been really interesting for me just to interview, I guess, all these punks in the community. We definitely come from very diverse backgrounds and are doing very different things. But more importantly, I think everyone is a believer in the space, wants to do right, inclusive, etc., and wants to build a better future for everybody too. And I sort of feel like punks are at the forefront from that. And I think definitely what you're doing with probably something and Lifeboat is definitely great to have you and as a punk leading that charge for us too. So definitely super proud of you doing that, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. And please keep the feedback on Lifeboat coming. We're making it
Yeah.
better every day.
Well, I guess do you want to have any sort of final closing comments, and how can sort of people find you?
Yeah, sure. My Twitter is Nat.eth. So NATDOTETH. And we're at Lifeboat Fi on Twitter. Lifeboat.fi is the website. My DMs are open. My email's open. Don't be a stranger. So I mean, anyone in the space who wants to reach out, we're all still so early, and it almost feels trite to say that at this point, but the reality is that we're at a point now where we've all got to be working together to build this out. So really excited for all the support I've seen in the community, and can't wait to see where we go from here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nat, once again. And guys, that wraps up another episode of PunkCast for the week. And we'll be back next week with another punk. Bye for now.